there's another video. Um, which one was it? It was this
NATO
one.
foreign ministers just wrapped.
There was a, and I think that this whole point is really kind of comes down to is, when is Trump gonna make an ultimatum again for Ukraine? And what is Europeans' role in all of this? Because you have because the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, came out saying that Ukraine is on a irreversible path to NATO membership, and of course, United States and Russia is saying that they will never support that idea. Um, that's the Russian talking points. Um, but at the same time, um, you have Zelensky's going around trying to rally all the support he can from Europeans, and it's getting nowhere. So here's another, this is pretty much right at, so this video is gonna say something on right after, I don't think it's after, it was before, I believe it was before the meeting between Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. Putin is, in his military uniform, his military scrubs, came out and pretty much just said, um, we don't, you know, they don't want war with Europe, but but they're ready for a war with Europe. So I don't really understand where Europeans kind of, yeah, I don't know where the disconnect is. I don't know, I don't know where that came from, but
Wrapped up a critically important meeting in Brussels with the war in Ukraine clearly topping their agenda. NATO Secretary General reiterating the alliance's support for the war-torn country.
Ukraine continues to show incredible resilience. Putin believes he can outlast us, but we are not going anywhere. Today is yet another clear sign that he is wrong. We are strengthening our support for Ukraine and increasing pressure on Russia.
Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, that comes one.
so here we have, I believe she might be the translator or something. So Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, Ushakov, economic dude, and then Putin. I don't know who the middle guy is, but I mean, most of them speak English quite well. So,
Day after
or
marathon
not, yeah,
talks in
English.
Moscow between Russia's Vladimir Putin and President Trump's negotiators, the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Those negotiations produced no breakthrough on a plan to end the war in Ukraine. Joining us now to discuss what's going on, the former U.S. ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us. Patience clearly is growing thin among European foreign ministers, NATO leaders who say Vladimir Putin is not necessarily even interested in peace right now. Should NATO be at the table for these U.S.-led peace talks, and should Ukraine eventually be able to join NATO?
Well, I'm not sure the peace talks are going to go anywhere, so I wouldn't really press for whether NATO's involved or not, although there should be very close coordination between the United States and our European allies. But what really needs to happen is more pressure on Putin, as Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, just said. Going and having talks when Putin has made clear that he wants to subjugate Ukraine completely to Russia is just not going to go anywhere. Putin has to feel the pressure. So that's going to be secondary sanctions on oil and gas trading. It's going
That's
to be
the
long-range weapons that can hit deeper
European
inside
Union
Russia to take out the
representative,
military
Callas
facilities
something
that
something,
Russia's using to hit Ukraine, oil
or one
refineries
of
that
them.
Ukraine is doing on its own. Putin really has to feel the heat financially, economically, and militarily if we're going to get to a point where he has a ceasefire.
The Kremlin says Putin has accepted at least some U.S. proposals on Ukraine and says Russia is ready to keep on talking.
Uh, that's funny because I think the reason why the Kremlin is saying they agreed to some, you know, these, mind you, these guys are very, very smart um, when it comes to like understanding how Trump works. They're essentially just speaking Trump's language.
Are these negotiations, you believe, going anywhere?
Not at all. If remember how we got here, this was Russia producing its own proposals and giving them to Steve Witkoff, who turns around and puts out this 28-point plan, which was horrendous. It was just the Russian position. And then that was modified in negotiations between Marco Rubio, the Ukrainians, and European allies to produce a more reasonable plan. The Ukrainians said this is passable. And then the Russians reject that. There are probably a few points that made it into both plans, but they're just the original Russian points that the Russians are saying are okay. Meanwhile, they are not willing to stop the fighting. They're not going to have a ceasefire until they get everything that they want. They're demanding Ukraine withdraw from Ukrainian territory. It's really an incredibly maximalist position.
The NATO Secretary General, as you heard, Mark Rutte, offered his full-throated support for President Trump's peace efforts, saying President Trump is, and I'm quoting him now, the only person in the whole world who can break this deadlock. Should Europe be taking a more active role in the process, Ambassador? And what about other parties? For example, even China?
Yeah, I do think Europe could be doing more. They have agreed already to spend.
It's not that Europe can do more. I mean, Europe wants to do more, but Europe can't do anything without Trump, without the United States letting them in. No matter what no matter, whether it's sanctions, whether it's coalition of the willing, they're not going to do anything without. Not saying that the United States needs to sign off on it, is that I mean, they even need to be at the negotiation table to even begin, to understand the European side of things. Um, time after time, I mean, the several meetings, the Europeans aren't even there. We have the Alaska, the last week, the 28-point peace plan, um, the new 19 peace plan, the delegation with visiting to Kremlin with the recent one. I mean, none of the recent negotiations and discussions even remotely involved any of the Europeans. So,
A lot more on defense. They are now coordinating delivery of American arms and ammunition through NATO mechanisms. Those are good steps. More that can be done. We could be integrating Ukraine's air defenses with NATO's own air defenses so we can be helping them more with air defense. NATO could have its own extended air defense zone going further toward Ukraine or covering part of Ukrainian territory to protect NATO populations who have been exposed to drone and missile encroachments from Russia. They could be providing the frozen assets. They could be seizing those assets, the Russian central bank assets, using that to provide you.
yeah. So this one is the interesting one because I believe the European delegation, or not European delegation, but a lot of the collective of Europeans wants to use the frozen Russian assets. I believe like it was 250 to 300 billion. And a third of that is owned and managed by Brussels, Belgium. And Belgium is, afraid of the retaliation, the legal ramification of allowing this. And of course, there's already been several European discussions on how to essentially share the risk of Belgium. So, when Russia turns around and say, uh, you know, goes after Belgium, Belgium is not there to fend off by itself, but Europeans are there to kind of hold their hands, hold Belgium's hand through this. Um, but yeah, I don't know, because right now I believe that the figures are Ukrainians are supposedly running out of their piggy bank funds around April 2026, and the Europeans, the president of European Union is trying really hard to push the frozen assets package, like 104 billion or something for the figures in for 2026. So
Ukraine money for ammunition, arms, and financial support. So there's a lot that Europe could still be doing more of itself to make itself more relevant and be part of any kind of diplomatic discussions.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said today the head of the Ukrainian delegation is preparing to meet President Trump's representatives here in the United States. Where do you see this headed?
Well, I think that for the Ukrainians, they sent a delegation to Florida before the trip to Moscow. They want to get a readout, a detailed readout after the trip to Moscow. Ukraine has aligned itself with the United States very deliberately. They're willing to have a ceasefire in place, even though it means recognizing or accepting that Russia occupies 20% of Ukrainian territory. They have worked out this minerals deal. So there's a joint U.S.-Ukrainian investment fund. So we have shared economic interests going forward. So Ukraine is assiduously linking itself to the US and Europe because it wants to be, and it will be, a sovereign, independent European democracy and part of Euro-Atlantic institutions. That's where this heads. But getting there requires getting Putin to stop the fighting.
Ambassador Kurt Volker, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Wolf. Thank you.
More comments today from the Kremlin over those talks that didn't produce a breakthrough in the war in Ukraine. An aide to Vladimir Putin says Tuesday's meeting in Moscow between Russia's president and Donald Trump's top two negotiators was useful and that talks will continue. Well, a big sticking point for Russia is Ukraine's potential membership in NATO, and NATO foreign ministers have been meeting.
Let's go back. I wanted to say something. So the Kremlin, Russia is ready to keep talking to forge Ukraine deal. So here's my take in all of this is that Putin is a KGB officer, and everybody on the U.S. side is economic individuals, Trump included. I mean, I guess Trump itself has has his own first term presidency to kind of understand the Russian side. But the Russians are really good at timing certain things and certain activities. And I believe multiple fronts now, just before Zelensky is set to meet, Trump, you have you pretty much have the day before, the hour before, Putin makes a phone call to Trump, kind of, I don't know if I would call it sabotage, but derail the next day discussion, derail the discussion between Zelensky and Trump for the next day, and that has happened several times. But I think that the reason why this statement was made, they're just buying time. They're just buying time because eventually Ukrainians are just going to run out of funds, and Russia is, I'd say Russia is stronger than ever. I mean, maybe not economically because I know their economic is it's taking a huge toll with the sanctions and keeping up with his war machines. But I mean, they got alliances, they got money to burn, they got bodies to throw at all these problems. So I don't think it's going to be an issue for the Russians to continue. And the Russians are just hoping that eventually the Ukrainians are gonna slowly run out. So
For Russia is Ukraine's potential membership in NATO, and NATO foreign ministers have been meeting today in Brussels to discuss Ukraine. This comes after a senior NATO official recently said there's no indication that Moscow is willing to make meaningful concessions to end this war. Well, for its part, the EU is trying to put a dent in Russia's war chest by phasing out Russian natural gas imports by late 2027. I want to head to Washington to CNN's Kylie Atwood on this.
yeah, I think that's a pretty big deal. I don't know why they haven't. I don't know why it takes, it takes up to this point for the Europeans to realize they need to, their dependency, not only dependency, but they shouldn't be, uh, pooling all of their all of their money towards um, buying cheap Russian oil. Um, but now you have certain other, specifically NATO countries like Slovakia and Hungary still buys Russian, and even Trump gave Hungary a 1 year uh, you know bypass to the Russian sanctions. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about that.
Noting that Secretary Rubio was not there for these talks, just how much real progress, as you understand it, has been made at this point?
Well, the readout that we got from Russian officials certainly does not give the indication that the two parties walked away on the verge of a possible agreement, Becky. We heard from the Kremlin taking questions after this meeting yesterday, saying that President Putin did agree with the U.S. officials, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, on a number of issues, but that he also did not hide his negative views on a number of the proposals, indicating that there is still some significant hesitation on behalf of Russia to move forward with what the U.S. was putting on.
Okay, let's think of some of the things that that the Russians could have agreed to, because let's pull up a the 28 peace plan, in because I don't know if I have um the 19 or 20 peace plan. Let me see. I don't know if
On
I
the
can
table, which they had discussed.
open up another tab. 28 point. See if this one has it. No. Uh, no. Trying to find. Maybe this one has it. Okay. Yeah. So let's go through this really quick. Um, yeah. This is why I hate using these news channels, because these ads are just mind-boggling. Okay. So so she essentially is saying, the Russians agreed on some and disagreed on some. So this isn't a way that's saying that, oh, we're getting closer um we're getting closer to finding a peace deal between all of this. Because if you look at some of these points, of course Russia's going to agree on. Um, because there's some stupid ones, like Russia will be integrated into the global economy. Who would have thought? Of course they're gonna, of course they want that. Derp derp. Um, Russia will be invited to rejoin the G8. That's a pretty good thing. Yeah, if I were Russian, I like that. Um, Frozen funds would be used as follows. Um, there is the remainder of the frozen Russian funds, so about a third of it will be invested in separate U.S. Russian investment. If I was Russian, that sounds like a pretty good deal. Um, yeah, I mean, of course, this is 28. I don't know I don't know the revised 18 or 18, 19, 20 20 plan. Here's another one. Ukraine will hold election in 100 days. Yeah, if I don't know why that's a big deal for the Russians. I don't know why the United States is pushing this. Um, maybe the Russian election is an example for everybody to follow. Who knows? Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's when they say they agreed on some, this is what they're talking about. Agreed on some.
with the Ukrainians. Now, we did hear from President Trump yesterday during a meeting with his cabinet at the White House while his officials were over in Russia meeting with President Putin. Listen to what President Trump said about that ongoing meeting.
Our people are over in Russia right now to see if we can get it settled. Not an easy situation. Let me tell you what a mess. It's a war that never would have happened if I were president. Not even
What
a
a
chance.
lame
And it
talking
didn't
point.
happen for 4 years.
I mean, he's gonna drive this until the wheels off. It's irrelevant at this point. Um, sure, he essentially, you know, to quote his words, inherited this um from the Biden presidency. Um, but I mean, this technically started all the way back in Obama. Um, but and I believe during his first term, he said that he sent javelins and Obama, sent bed sheets and whatnot. So I don't know. I think all of these talking points are pointless. But at the end of the day, I believe Trump has a I don't know if I blame himself, but more of his cabinets, the people that are whispering in his ear. Yeah.
Now, one of the other things that the Kremlin said is, interestingly, that there are now 4 documents, not just one document, that the two parties are going to be discussing. We don't know the details of what is in those 4 documents that are now standing. We do know that there are no plans for further follow-up meetings in person between President Putin and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. They said that they would follow up by phone. And of course, we're watching to see what U.S. officials say today about this after they briefed the White House. Going into these meetings, we should note that Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on Sunday, after meeting with the Ukrainians, that this was incredibly complicated. He cast this as being something that still had some work to be done. Even though the U.S. is talking in person with both sides, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to get both sides to close that gap of where those disagreements still stand. Becky?
Good to have you. Thank you.
I don't know why my ad blocker is not working properly.
Well,
But
Donald Trump's
yeah, that's kind of all I got for today. Um, yeah, like, subscribe, follow, all the YouTube stuff. Cool. See you all on the next, maybe tomorrow or maybe the next day. Um, kind of take it day by day with the holiday season. So
Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust.